When someone walks away thinking they can replace you, it's often because they never fully saw you. They didn't recognize the depth of your presence, the weight of your loyalty, or the quiet strength you carried in the background of their life. It's easy to take for granted something that is consistent, something that doesn't demand attention but is always there until it's gone. And when it's gone, when you remove yourself without yelling, pleading, or begging, that absence becomes louder than any words you ever said while you were present. There is something powerful, almost magnetic about silence when it comes after devotion. You see, people expect anger. They expect you to fight, to scream, to argue, to demand closure. But when you give them none of that, when you simply retreat into your own world and continue your journey in silence, you shake something inside of them. The absence begins to echo. They hear your name in quiet rooms. They feel your energy in places where you once stood. And suddenly, replacing you is no longer a quick solution. It becomes an impossible task. What they often misunderstand is that you were not there just to fill a role. You were not a placeholder. You were a force, a support, an emotional anchor. And even if they never said it aloud, they leaned on your presence. They leaned on the way you listened without judgment. The way you encouraged even when you were discouraged yourself. The way you stayed when staying wasn't easy. And when you left, all of that left with you. It's easy for someone to believe that another body can replace a soul. That's the illusion. They think love is transactional. They think anyone can give what you gave. But the truth is, most people can't even understand what you gave, let alone replicate it. They think attention is affection. They think flattery is depth. They confuse presence with presence. Someone being physically around isn't the same as someone being spiritually aligned with you. When they finally realize this, regret becomes inevitable. And the regret is never instant. It doesn't show up on the day you walk away. It doesn't even come in the weeks that follow. No, regret is slow. It creeps in during ordinary moments. When they laugh and realize it doesn't sound as full. When they talk and don't feel heard. When they lie next to someone else but feel emotionally alone. That's when your absence becomes undeniable. That's when they start to realize that replacing you wasn't easy. It was impossible. But here's where it gets deeper. Your absence doesn't just make them regret losing you, it forces them to confront themselves. Because in your silence, there is a mirror. A mirror that shows them how they treated something rare as if it were ordinary. And now they have to sit with that. They have to live with knowing that someone was willing to give them everything and they weren't ready to receive it. That kind of realization doesn't come with a peaceful mind. It comes with emotional weight. The kind of weight that drowns you slowly. Not all at once, but bit by bit, day by day, moment by moment. And you, on the other hand, you don't need to speak to prove your worth. Your absence is doing all the work for you. You're not on a mission to make them feel pain. You're not watching and waiting for them to fall apart. You're simply choosing peace over chaos. You're choosing to redirect your energy inward instead of spilling it into a black hole of unreciprocated effort. And that shift is seismic. What people often overlook is that your silence is not weakness. It's not surrender. It's not defeat. It is a conscious choice. It is you deciding that your energy is too sacred to be wasted on someone who failed to see your light when they had the chance. And in doing so, you elevate. You create space for yourself. Space to grow, space to heal, space to reconnect with who you are, separate from who you were trying to be for someone else. In the beginning, they may have felt strong walking away or watching you leave, but strength without emotional awareness is a fragile illusion. Time has a way of revealing what emotion hides. As days turn into weeks and weeks into months, what once felt like power on their end begins to dissolve. That false sense of control turns into confusion, and confusion breeds reflection. That's when the floodgates open. The conversations you had replay in their mind. The small things you did, the ones they ignored, now feel massive. That's the irony of absence. It magnifies what presence made feel so normal. You weren't just someone in their life. You were an atmosphere, a vibe, an unspoken calm. And when that's gone, everything feels colder. They look around and realize that they're surrounded by people who don't truly know them. People who weren't there when they were at their worst. People who don't love them for who they are, but only for what they show. And then the memory of you becomes more than a thought. It becomes a weight, a realization. A burden of knowing they had something rare and they let it go, believing they could find it again anywhere. When someone rejects you, especially someone you deeply cared about, the natural tendency is to internalize that rejection as a statement about your worth. You begin to wonder what you lacked, what you did wrong, what part of you was unworthy of love or commitment. But the truth is, rejection is not a mirror. It's not always a reflection of your inadequacy. More often than not, it's a redirection, a detour crafted by life itself, pulling you away from what was never meant to hold you so you can finally walk toward what will honor you. It's uncomfortable, it's painful, and it can leave you emotionally breathless. But within that rejection lies a strange kind of mercy, a liberation disguised as loss. The person who left you, overlooked you, replaced you, or dismissed you did not disqualify you. They disqualified themselves from your journey. And though it stings in the moment, it becomes one of the greatest gifts life can offer. Clarity. Clarity about who sees your value and who never did. Clarity about what you were trying to force and where you were settling for crumbs while starving for a real connection. And clarity about how much more you were giving than what you were receiving in return. That kind of truth may be painful, but it is the beginning of personal power. Rejection doesn't destroy you. The perception of rejection does. It's not the act of someone walking away. It's the story you tell yourself about why they did. When you shift the narrative from I wasn't enough to they weren't equipped to value what I offered, you begin to detach your identity from someone else's blindness. Because let's be honest, someone who truly knows your worth doesn't discard you. They hold on, they protect, they build. If someone could walk away from your depth and your devotion, it means they didn't have the emotional capacity to appreciate the substance you carried. The pain of rejection is a trigger. It forces you to confront yourself, not because something is wrong with you, but because it invites you to remember who you are without the need for someone else's approval. Sometimes the greatest awakenings come after the deepest wounds. That pain cracks open the shell of illusion. The illusion that you needed them. The illusion that you would be lost without them. The illusion that they were the best thing that ever happened to you. And once that shell breaks, you begin to rise. Not as a reaction, but as a rebirth. This redirection doesn't just lead you away from them. It leads you back to yourself. It leads you to the parts of you that you buried to be loved. The dreams you put on hold, the voice you silenced, the needs you suppressed. All in the name of staying connected to someone who was never truly aligned with your spirit. And now that they're gone, you have a sacred opportunity to gather all those pieces of yourself and build again. This time, not for someone else, but for you. People don't often talk about how rejection builds character. Not in the shallow motivational sense, but in the real, raw, quiet moments when you're sitting alone with your thoughts, learning how to comfort yourself. When you're choosing to get up again, not because anyone is cheering you on, but because something deep inside of you refuses to quit. That is resilience. That is self-trust. And that is something no relationship can give or take from you. It's earned in the fire. They thought they could walk away and leave you broken. But what they didn't anticipate is that rejection would become the very fuel you needed to break free from everything that was weighing you down. You stop needing validation. You stop waiting for explanations. You stop trying to prove your value to someone who is never ready to receive it. And in that detachment, you reclaim your energy. You stop begging for a seat at tables you were meant to flip over. You may not see it immediately, but rejection clears your path. The doors that closed were never locked to trap you. They were closed to protect you from walking into something that would have drained your soul. Sometimes life has to strip everything away from you so you can finally build on truth, not illusion. The pain becomes a teacher, and if you let it, it teaches you not just how to heal, but how to discern, how to recognize who is for you and who only pretends to be, how to tell the difference between attention and intention, how to stop making excuses for those who don't show up for you, and how to stop shrinking so others can feel comfortable in your presence. Eventually, the rejection that once broke you becomes the moment that built you. It becomes the fire that sharpened your awareness, the storm that forced you to anchor within. You don't just bounce back, you rise higher. You stop asking why they left, and you start asking why you stayed so long. That shift is everything. That's when you realize you were never rejected, you were redirected. Not to something lesser, but to something more aligned, more worthy, and more in tune with the highest version of yourself. There's something deeply unsettling about being replaced. It triggers a storm of emotions: anger, confusion, heartbreak, jealousy, and a quiet kind of despair that gnaws at your sense of worth. When someone moves on quickly, when they replace you like you were just a placeholder in their life, you can't help but wonder, was I ever really valued? That question eats away at your self-esteem because your mind begins to construct stories that may not even be true. You imagine them laughing with someone else, doing all the things you used to do together, saying the same sweet words you once believed were just for you. But what your imagination doesn't tell you is that not everything that looks shiny is solid. Sometimes people try to replace what they had because they're too weak to face what they lost. The person who left you and thought replacing you would be easy was chasing the illusion of comfort without the substance of connection. They weren't ready to do the internal work. They didn't have the maturity to sit in the silence and face what went wrong. Instead, they filled the void, hoping a new face would silence the echoes of your presence. But here's the truth. What they ran to is a distraction, not a solution. They may appear happy on the surface, but underneath that surface is a restlessness they can't quiet because they know deep down what they had with you wasn't ordinary. It was real, and real isn't replaceable. When someone thinks they can find you in someone else, they don't realize they're looking for a soul in a shadow. You weren't just another person. You were a combination of depth, loyalty, compassion, and strength. And those qualities don't come in abundance. So while they may find someone who's exciting for a moment, it won't take long for them to realize excitement without substance fades quickly. The newness wears off, and they're left facing a reflection of their own emptiness. What hurts the most isn't just that they replaced you, it's how easily they seemed to do it. But what you must remember is that appearances are often deceiving. Many people pretend to move on quickly because they're running from the guilt, not from you. It's easier to jump into something new than to sit alone and confront the truth that they lost someone rare. And while they're busy trying to suppress regret, you have a chance to grow, evolve, and reconnect with yourself in a way you never could when you were tied to someone who couldn't see your worth. Replacement doesn't mean improvement. People don't always upgrade when they move on. They often downgrade emotionally, spiritually, and relationally. What they gain in attention, they lose in authenticity. What they gain in distraction, they lose in connection. And what they gain in ease, they lose in depth. That trade-off may seem worth it to them at first, but eventually emptiness catches up. You can't outrun the consequences of mistreating someone who showed up with love, patience, and loyalty. Life has a way of bringing that full circle. You may be tempted to compare yourself to the one they chose next. You may scroll through their photos, analyze their appearance, their energy, their smile, and torture yourself by trying to see what they had that you didn't. But that's a trap. You're not replaceable because your soul isn't repeatable. The unique way you listened, the way you supported, the way you loved, the way you forgave, the way you stood by them when they were at their lowest, that can't be mimicked or manufactured. They may find someone else, but they won't find you. And in time, the illusion will shatter. The fantasy will lose its shine. The grass they thought was greener will reveal its artificial roots, and the emptiness they tried to escape will return louder than ever. That's when the regret sets in. Not because they truly miss having someone around, but because they finally realize the kind of person they let go. By then, you won't be who you were. You'll be stronger, wiser, more whole. You'll have grown from the pain. You'll have rebuilt your identity. You'll have stopped asking, why did they leave? And started asking, why was I holding on? Their regret is their burden. It's not your responsibility to soothe it or even acknowledge it. Your job is to rise, to turn your pain into power, to use the rejection as a platform to rediscover the version of yourself that forgot how much you bring to the table. When you know your value, you no longer question why someone else couldn't see it. You just thank life for removing the blind so you can see clearly again. You don't chase what walked away because you understand that being replaced doesn't mean being erased. You're still here. You're still valuable. And you are still becoming. There's a sacred kind of strength in letting go, not the kind that shows itself through loud declarations or emotional outbursts, but the kind that emerges in silence, in solitude, in the slow and often painful unraveling of what once was. Letting go is not forgetting, and it's certainly not pretending that it never mattered. Letting go is acknowledging the depth of what you felt, honoring the truth of your experience, and still choosing not to be defined by it. It's one of the most powerful forms of self-respect because it requires you to release your grip on something that is no longer serving your soul, even if your heart still aches for it. People often misunderstand what it means to move on. They think it's about no longer caring, no longer remembering, no longer feeling anything at all. But moving on is not emotional amnesia, it's emotional mastery. It's the process of reclaiming your energy from places it no longer belongs. It's about standing in front of your own reflection and saying, I deserve peace, even if I loved deeply. I deserve clarity, even if I gave endlessly. I deserve joy, even if I was left behind. Moving on is the art of detaching your worth from someone else's decision. And that art is what separates those who heal from those who keep reopening the same emotional wounds. There is nothing easy about this kind of growth. It doesn't happen in a day or even in a month. It happens in waves. Some mornings you wake up and feel free, like a weight has lifted off your chest. Other days the memories hit you like a thunderstorm. You remember their voice, their laughter, the way they used to look at you, and it stings all over again. But every time you choose not to reach out, not to stalk their social media, not to replay the conversations in your head, you take your power back. Every time you refuse to let your emotions drag you backward, you rise a little higher into yourself. Letting go also means letting go of the fantasy, not just the person, but the illusion you held in your mind about what could have been, what should have been, what would have been, if only things had gone differently. That fantasy is often more addictive than the relationship itself, because it gives you something to hold on to. But as long as you're holding on to a future that never existed, you can't fully step into the one that's waiting for you. You can't build something new while clinging to the rubble of something broken. Your mind may try to justify the pain by making it meaningful, but the truth is, not every story has a perfect ending. And that's okay. Sometimes closure is not given to you by the other person. Sometimes you give it to yourself the moment you decide that you matter more than what you lost. Your healing begins when you stop asking why they didn't choose you and start asking why you kept choosing them after they showed you they weren't ready. That's a shift most people are afraid to make because it requires brutal honesty. It means confronting your own patterns, your own blind spots, your own desire to fix what wasn't yours to fix. But in that confrontation lies your freedom. You realize that love shouldn't require you to abandon yourself. That being enough isn't about being perfect. It's about being whole. And anyone who can't see your wholeness isn't someone you need to convince to stay. Letting go also means refusing to carry their silence any longer. Sometimes the most painful part of a breakup isn't the absence of love, but the absence of explanation. When people leave without clarity, they leave you with 1,000 unanswered questions. And those questions can eat away at your peace. But healing doesn't always come with answers. Sometimes it comes with a decision to live without them. You accept that the story ended the way it did, not because you were unworthy, but because it was time to return to yourself. You were never meant to lose yourself in loving someone else. You were meant to grow, to stretch, to expand, but never to shrink. There's power in choosing yourself. Power in walking away from what no longer aligns with your truth. Power in embracing solitude, not as a punishment, but as preparation. The space between letting go and moving on is sacred. It's where transformation happens. It's where you unlearn the lies you believed about yourself. It's where you redefine love, not as sacrifice, but as alignment. And it's where you remember that the greatest love story you'll ever live is the one you write with yourself. When someone believes they can easily replace you, it often speaks more about their illusions than your worth. It reflects a mindset rooted in superficiality, one that overlooks depth, commitment, and emotional substance. In the aftermath of being cast aside or minimized, a strange thing happens. You begin to see just how rare you truly are. But before you arrive at that clarity, there's often a storm of emotional chaos to wade through. One of the deepest wounds that can form from such an experience is the internalized sense of being disposable. That wound doesn't scream, it whispers. It whispers through moments of overthinking, through questioning your value, through feeling like you weren't enough. And this pain can stay with you long after they've moved on, or pretended to. But here's a truth that few people will tell you. When they realize what they walked away from, when the glow of the new wears off, when they find themselves empty in the very place they thought they'd feel fulfilled, they start to drown. Not physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Because replacing someone who gave deeply, loved intentionally, and showed up fully is not as easy as it looks on the surface. At first, they may enjoy the attention of someone new. They might find comfort in novelty. They might even flaunt it to convince themselves that they made the right decision. But emotional depth is not something you can replace with distraction. Eventually, silence replaces the noise. And it is in that silence that regret begins to scream. Regret is an invisible prison. It builds its walls slowly, brick by brick, thought by thought. A memory here, a comparison there, a moment of longing that no one else seems to fill. They may smile on the outside, but inside, they're haunted by what they lost. Especially when they see you rising. Especially when they realize that your absence is louder than your presence ever was. Especially when they understand that what you offered wasn't ordinary, it was rare, it was irreplaceable, and it was theirs to cherish, not abandon. This is where your perspective must shift. You are not the one drowning. You are not the one scrambling to fill a void. You are not the one chasing illusions. You are the one learning, evolving, shedding old skin and building new strength. You're not here to compete with the person they try to replace you with. You're not here to prove that you're better. Your value is not validated through comparison. It is affirmed through awareness. The more you become aware of your own rarity, your own emotional intelligence, your own capacity to love without losing yourself, the less you need someone else's regret to feel whole again. But for this shift to happen, you have to stop romanticizing what left. You have to stop replaying conversations that were never sincere. You have to stop imagining alternate endings to stories that were never meant to continue. The mind can be your worst enemy when it's operating out of scarcity and attachment. But when you begin to feed your mind truth, real truth, not emotional addiction, you reclaim your power. You stop waiting for validation and start becoming your own source of it. You stop looking for signs from someone who already showed you everything you needed to know. You stop craving closure and become your own resolution. One of the most potent lessons that comes from this kind of heartbreak is the recognition of your emotional wealth. Yes, you were hurt. Yes, you were left. But what you gave, that was real. That was strong. That was gold. And they didn't walk away because you weren't enough. They walked away because they weren't capable of holding what you offered. That's not your failure. That's their limitation. Don't let their inability to see your light make you question whether it was ever shining in the first place. It was. And it still is. Eventually, the one who thought they could replace you will come to a quiet, internal understanding. You were not the one. You were the standard. And standards can't be mimicked by surface-level substitutes. That's when the regret begins to deepen. That's when the echo of your presence starts to pierce through their distractions. That's when the smile fades, the noise quiets, and they're left with nothing but the realization that they gave up something they may never find again. But that realization isn't for you to witness. It's not your job to see their pain. It's not your responsibility to be the lesson in their journey. Your role is to rise, not to gloat, not to wait, but to rise. Rise from self-doubt. Rise from pain. Rise from the idea that your worth depends on anyone else's recognition. Rise so fully and so boldly that your energy speaks long before you do. Because when you rise like that, their regret becomes a footnote in your story, not the center of it. You must come to understand that healing is not about proving your worth to someone who chose to walk away. It's about rediscovering your worth for yourself. There's a shift that happens when you stop asking why they left and begin asking why you were so willing to abandon yourself to keep them. That shift is where your power is. Because the moment you start pouring back into yourself, something sacred begins to emerge, self-trust. And without self-trust, you can't fully heal. You can't fully move on. And you can't fully become who you were always meant to be. You'll keep circling the same patterns, not because you're weak, but because you're still trying to find home in someone who never built a place for you to belong. The real healing begins when you become your own sanctuary. The truth is, emotional pain doesn't evaporate with time alone. It transforms only when you become intentional with your thoughts, your habits, your beliefs. You have to train your mind like a muscle. If you feed it stories of lack, you will feel like you're lacking. If you rehearse pain, you will relive it. If you keep looking back, you'll crash into your own future. The human mind is like fertile soil. It will grow whatever you plant. If you plant blame, anger, and bitterness, you will harvest regret, resentment, and stagnation. But if you plant accountability, clarity, and self-love, you will grow purpose, wisdom, and peace. You must become the gardener of your inner world, because no one else is going to do the weeding for you. There will be moments when you feel like slipping back into the old version of you, the one who tolerated being an option, who made excuses for emotional unavailability, who stayed silent just to keep the peace. But that version of you was born from fear, not truth. That version was survival-based. You were doing the best you could with the knowledge you had at the time. But now you know better. Now you understand that love does not require sacrifice of the self. That true connection does not come at the cost of your peace. That real intimacy cannot exist where inconsistency thrives. You've learned through experience, through loss, through heartbreak. And now you must apply that wisdom. And applying it doesn't mean hardening your heart. It means softening toward yourself. It means giving yourself the grace you so freely offer to others. It means setting boundaries not out of fear, but out of respect for your energy, for your spirit, for your future. Because you are not in the business of convincing someone of your worth. You are in the business of embodying it so deeply that anything less than mutual recognition cannot survive in your space. Letting go of someone who thought you were replaceable doesn't mean you hate them. It means you love yourself more. It means you finally see that chasing closure from someone who couldn't even offer a consistency is a trap. That expecting an apology from someone who lacks self-awareness will only keep you stuck. That holding on to bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting them to feel the pain. It doesn't work. The real flex is peace. The real strength is emotional freedom. And the real revenge, if you want to call it that, is becoming so aligned with your value that their absence becomes irrelevant. You cannot rewrite the past. You cannot force someone to see what they refuse to appreciate. But you can take everything that tried to break you and use it to build a stronger foundation. You can choose to respond to pain, not with more pain, but with purpose. You can turn your heartbreak into your awakening. You can turn your disappointment into your standard. But only if you stop waiting for the person who left to return and validate what you already know deep down, that you are enough. That you were always enough. That you didn't lose them, they lost you. And in this process of healing, you must also forgive yourself. Not for loving too much, but for thinking that your love could fix what someone else refused to face. You were not wrong for giving your heart. You were not foolish for believing in potential. You were simply human. But now you are an evolved version of that human. One who has tasted betrayal, but didn't become bitter. One who has faced rejection, but didn't reject themselves. One who has walked through fire and didn't burn, but transformed. Emotional healing is not a straight line. Some days you'll feel strong, clear, and full of direction. Other days you'll wonder if you've made any progress at all. That's normal. What matters is that you keep moving forward. Keep reminding yourself that you are not defined by who left or why they left. You are defined by how you rise. You are defined by the decisions you make in the quiet when no one is watching, when the loneliness feels loud, when the memories try to drag you back. That's when your healing takes root. That's when your inner power is forged. That's when you start walking not just away from them, but toward the highest version of yourself.